Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya Ali Madad and good evening to each one of you. On behalf of the Ismaili Tariqa and Religious Education Board for India and the Institute of Ismaili Studies, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this special Imamat Day book event on the recently published book, The Ismaili Imams, a biographical history by Dr. Farhad Daftary. Thank you for joining us on a Thursday evening to experience and explore the lives, actions, and legacies of our 49 Shia Ismaili Imams, and through them of the Ismaili community's history and heritage. I'm sure each one of you are excited to know about and explore this first collection of biographies of all the Ismaili Imams, from those living during the formative period of Islam through to the hidden Imams of the first period of concealment when their public identities remained guarded, to the Imam Caliphs of the illustrious Fatimid Dynasty and those of the Alamut Period up to the Aga Khans of the modern times. Whilst both Dr. Farhad Daftary and Mr. Hussain Jasani needs no introduction, however, for the sake of those who may not be familiar with their works, I will quickly introduce them. Dr. Daftary is the author of this book, and Mr. Hussain Jasani will be the interlocutor and dialogue with Dr. Daftary about his recently published book. Dr. Daftary is currently the co-director and the head of its Department of Academic Research and Publications at the IIS. He has held various academic posts in Iran. Before joining the institute, Dr. Daftary has made a significant contribution to the academia on Shi'i history in general and Ismaili history in particular, by contributing and publishing numerous articles and 20 books. A few amongst them are the Ismailis, their history and doctrines, the Assassin Legends, a short history of the Ismailis, Ismaili literature, a bibliography of sources and studies, a history of Shi'i Islam, and his most recent, The Ismaili Imams, a Biographical History. Alwaez Hussain Jasani has been with the Institute of Ismaili Studies since 2012, where he currently leads the South Asian Studies Unit. Mr. Jasani also serves as a member on the advisory board for the Encyclopedia of the Ismailis, planned to be published in the year 2022. Before joining the IIS, he served as the CEO of ITREB India. The International Penguin Publishing Home honored him with the Rising Personalities of India Award in 2004. Welcome, Dr. Daftary and Mr. Hussain Jasani. And I now invite the Honorary Secretary of ITREB India, Alisha Saiba Nazima Nanji, to welcome the author, dignitaries, and participants and start this much-awaited event. Over to you, Baima.
Thank you, Nadia. It is an honor and a privilege to have Dr. Daftary and Mr. Jasani with us for this event. We are all looking forward to hearing you and engaging with the recently published book. I would also like to welcome all the dignitaries and the participants who have joined in for this intellectually engaging journey. This book has been written in an accessible manner. It is beautifully designed and illustrated, and takes us on a journey to explore the history of our faith. It not only provides a biographical history of our 49 Imams, but also provides an understanding of how the Ismaili community has been guided by the Imams at various times. We are all eagerly looking forward to exploring 1400 years of Ismaili history with Dr. Daftary and Mr. Jasani. Without much ado, I now hand over to Mr. Jasani to begin the event. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorary Secretary Saiba, and thank you, Dr. Daftary, for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to be with us today. And it's my honor and privilege to be talking to my Ustad, my Guru. And nobody can claim to know the Ismaili history as well as Dr. Daftary knows. We have heard all sorts of things about Ivano, and I think Dr. Daftary has built a lot further on what Valdemar Ivano had achieved. So what we have done, Dr. Daftary, for this conversation is because because of the pandemic, the book has not reached the audience. So many in the audience have never seen the book. And we wanted them to have some kind of overview of the book. So we have, and the book is beautifully illustrated, unlike other books that we publish at the IIS. This is amazingly illustrated book. There are many images. We have identified about 15, 16 images and put them in 13 slides. I'll be flashing the slide, okay, and I'll be requesting you to talk about what the audience is seeing in the image. And for the audience, we have also put the caption so you can read about the image, but I'll be providing some data. And I'll now request Rehana to get the slideshow up so that we can start. And we can go to the next slide, please. Now, Dr. Daftary, this is where we want to start from, because we are talking about Ismaili Imams and Hazrat Imam Ismail. It is believed that had moved to Salamia. So Syria plays a very important role in the history of the Ismaili Imamate. Unfortunately, Syria is going through some troubled time. We pray and hope that the peace returns to that part of the world soon. But my request to you is, what are we seeing in the image? And what is the importance of the Syrian phase, Dore Satra 1, in the history of the Ismaili Imamate?
Well, good evening to everybody, and I'm delighted to be able to participate in this book launch under highly sort of difficult pandemic circumstances. And I hope to be able to launch this book in the near future in some face-to-face events. Now, to bring out the significance of this image, I must provide a bit of a context. And I will start by saying that, as you know, the Ismailis have been in fact, studied and judged until relatively recent times, almost exclusively on the basis of evidence collected or often fabricated by their adversaries. And as a result, a variety of myths and misrepresentations continued to circulate about the Shi'i Muslim community. The situation changed significantly from around 1930s, when a large number of genuine Ismaili texts became accessible to scholars. And this recovery of the literary heritage of the community, in fact, ushered in what can be really referred to as a revolution in the field of Ismaili studies. And on that basis, you see, gradually we embarked on deconstructing and debunking these various myths and legends and so on. Now, one of the most obscure periods in the entire history of the Ismaili community was the pre-Fatimid, or the so-called Dorosat, or the period of concealment, which really coincided with the opening 1 or 2 centuries of Ismaili history, from the time of the passing away of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq in the year 765 until the foundation of the Fatimid state in the year 909. The scholars at large knew very little about what had actually transpired during this period for 2 main reasons. One was that, as usual, of course, the historians have to base their statements on the sources, especially on sources that are reliable. The Ismailis themselves did not write much during this period, because this was more or less the revolutionary time of the movement. And secondly, for that same reason, the Imams and the leaders of the community, the Dais of the time, took every measure to, in fact, conceal their true identities and places of residence. But modern scholarship in the last 40, 50 years has really been able to shed light on that period. And you see, although there are still some points about which we are not sure, but we have the basic frame of what actually took place. And we do know that the Imams during that period were involved in organizing the dawah, or the community that was referred to by the Ismailis themselves as Ad-Da'wa al-Hadiya, or the right guiding mission. And these imams were actually located initially in the region of Khuzestan in southwestern Iran, next to Kufa, not too far from Kufa. Then they moved to Salamiya, which is in this slide. And from that time, around the middle of the 9th century, Salamiya served as the secret central headquarters of the Ismaili Jidawa. And 3 of the imams are known to have lived there. And this is, in fact, the shrine, the mausoleum of those 3 imams. That is,
so all 3 imams are buried in this.
All 3 imams there. We have references in some later sources that in the time of the Fatimids, probably in the time of Alwaez, Imam Alwaez, after he conquered Egypt and founded the city of Cairo in 969, and then transferred the seat of the Fatimid state from North Africa to Egypt in 973. Soon afterwards, evidently, they made efforts to bring the coffins of these imams from Salamiya to Cairo. But we are really not sure as to whether this site still holds the remains of those imams or the remains were actually transferred to Cairo.
I visited the site, and there are all sorts of myths around that space that most of those sites.
That's as far as we can
But this is
say.
very interesting part of our history, and it's good to know that there is an archaeological building which kind of evidence there.
Yes.
But then we see that if we go to the next slide, Rehana, suddenly we see this Fatimid Khilafat coming in existence. I mean, after Dawr Satr, you see Imam al-Mahdi walking into Ifriqiya, and we in fact see these 2 buildings there, the Great Mosque of Mahdiya, and the coin, these gold coins from Imam Mahdi's time. How did Imam Mahdi manage to establish a kingdom from Dawr Satr? It seems
That's
like a magical.
good question, because the answer to this question would also go a long way to explain the second phase in the history of the Ismaili community, and that's the phase of the Fatimid state. The Fatimid state was founded in North Africa in the year 909, mainly through the efforts of Dai Abu Abdullah al-Shi'i, who had been active amongst the Kotama Berbers of Ethiopia, which covered a region which today is known as Tunisia and eastern Algeria. And it was there that the Dai based his operations and succeeded rather rapidly to convert the bulk of the local Berbers into Ismailism and prepare the ground for the coming of the Imam of the time. And now the Imam of the time, Abdullah al-Mahdi, was the 4th of the Imams during the Dawr al-Sa'd. So part of his Imamat coincided with the Dawr al-Sa'd, and part of it coincided with the Dawr al-Kash for the period he had already left Salamiya in the year 902, and it took him about 7 years. It was a fateful, eventful 7-year journey, which took the Imam to Palestine, then to Egypt, where he spent about a year. Then he joined some Berber pilgrimage, Hajj caravans, and went to this town of Sejel Masa in what is today Morocco. Then when Dai Abu Abdullah al-Shi'i had succeeded in uprooting the Aghlabids who had ruled over Ethiopia from the year 800 on behalf of the Abbasids, the ground was prepared, and he left his brother Abu al-Abbas Qayrawan and himself, he headed down to hand over the reins of power to Imam al-Mahdi, and a preliminary ceremony was actually held in the city of Sejel Masa. But then the Imam headed for the city of Qayrawan, which was the capital of Ifriqiya. He arrived in that city on 4th of January 910. And he was immediately acclaimed as the caliph, which really marked the initiation of the reign of the Fatimid Dynasty in North Africa for about 60 odd years, and then in Egypt from 973 until 1171. So the entire Fatimid period lasted 262 years, and it was initiated by this event. This is the first point. The second point regarding the Mosque of Mahdiya, the Mosque of Mahdiya obviously was situated in the city of Mahdiya. The Fatimids were also city builders. They built at least 3 major cities which served as their capital cities. The first one was Mahdiya, second one was Mansouriya, the third one was Cairo or Al-Qahira. Imam al-Mahdi, about 20 years after his accession to the caliphate, transferred the seat of the Fatimid state from Qayrawan to Mahdiya, where this mosque had also been built. This mosque, the remains of it have been excavated by some French archaeologists in the 20th century, but much of it is in situ and is a fairly good shape. And those are amongst the earliest coins. The Fatimids had their own coins, and the Fatimid coins in terms of weight and quality of gold and inscriptions differ from coins minted by other Muslim dynasties. And these coins, and by the way, the Institute has a very large collection of Fatimid coins, about 2,000, if I'm not mistaken, the bulk of which has been given to the Institute by Hazar Imam. And these are actually, I believe, amongst the earliest samples of the coins minted by the Fatimids, which heralded the coming to power of the Ahlul Bayt.
Yeah, mashallah. So thank you very much. I mean, this is basically for the audience. If you have not read the book, you're getting the whole book in a capsule form in hopefully 30 to 40 minutes. The next slide, please, Rehana. And you mentioned Al-Qahira or Cairo that was built by the Fatimid Imams. And every time we talk about Cairo, we talk about Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar was an important building then and is equally important building in the 21st century for Muslims. So if you could speak to us, what was it? It was a university, mosque. What is it today?
Yes. Well, when Egypt was conquered by the Fatimid commander Al-Qaid Johar in 969, the expedition and the foundation of the city of Cairo all took place according to the plans and meticulously drawn and produced by Imam al-Mu'izz himself. So soon after his arrival in Egypt, Johar camped a few kilometers to the north of the old capital city of Fustat, which became the site of a new capital known as Al-Qahira al-Mu'izziyah, or simply as Cairo today. He built 2 palaces, one for the Imam, one for his heir, with a huge space between them, which was used for parades and ceremonials, and also founded the Mosque of Al-Azhar. Shortly afterwards, the Mosque of Al-Azhar was turned into an academic institution a few years later in the time of Imam al-Aziz, and it served as an institution of teaching and learning. Some of the Ismaili dais, in fact, received part of their training at Al-Azhar, as they did as the so-called Darul Ilm or Darul Hikmah, which was founded by Imam al-Hakim in the year 1005, later on. So this institution I mean, various lectures were held here, for instance, to the Majalis al-Hikmah for women for a while were held at Al-Azhar. Because the Fatimids had these lecture sessions for various audiences, including women. And to our knowledge, they were the only Muslim Muslim dynasty that had special lecture sessions for women.
Wow.
But then later on, when the Fatimids were replaced by the Ayyubids, they sort of destroyed many of the Fatimids monuments, including the well-known Fatimid libraries, which were kept there, the Darul El, and so on. But they kept Al-Azhar and turned it into a Sunni institution, and it served henceforth under the Ayyubids and then the Mamluks and then the Ottomans, and later on as perhaps a major institution of Sunni learning in the Muslim world, and it still has that
prestigious kind of position.
Status within the Ummah. So it's really a formal, official.
Even today.
Yes, even today, institution of Sunni teaching.
Mashallah. Okay, so there is a lot that we can talk about the Fatimid period. You have written extensively in your books, multiple books. But I was fascinated reading Nasir-i Khusraw's accounts of visiting Cairo. He seems to be completely mesmerized by what he sees in the city. He was, right? And so if we get the next slide, please, Rehana. We have, these images from Nasir Khusraw's works, but I want you to focus on how he describes Cairo and what was so, and then of course he goes back to Central Asia and continues his dawah, where we then have the Jamaat.
Well, Nasir Khusraw was a fascinating, multifaceted scholar. He was a theologian, obviously, a da'i, a philosopher, a poet, a major poet of the Persian language. He's usually ranked amongst the top 6 poets of Persian language, together with Ferdowsi, Saadi, Hafiz, Rumi, and Khayyam. He's in that league. And he was a very keen observer and has left behind this most valuable travelogue for us, his Safarnameh, which captures the details of his 7-year journey from his native land in Central Asia to Egypt, where he spent about 3 years. Where he arrived in 1047, if I'm not mistaken. And in this Safarnameh, he has many fascinating sections, and he describes various places and sites in great and meticulous details. Now, the description that he has left of Cairo is perhaps unique in many respects. We do not have a similar contemporary, because this is an eyewitness report, and he was very much, impressed, and he explains the richness, the well-being of the city of Cairo in terms of its flourishing bazaars, hangings, gardens, baths, shops, and the safety and the security that the people enjoyed. Apparently, when they went for the prayers, they did not even close their shops. They left the shops open. He relates all these sort of details, which in most cases are really unique, details about the prosperity of the Fatimid capital at that time, even though the caliphate had already embarked on its slow decline, but still there was enough left for him to be for a keen observer like Nasir Khusraw to be so impressed by what he saw in Cairo.
Thank you very much for that fascinating account, and I hope that pandemic situation improves and many of us can visit Cairo,
I
and
recommend
hopefully,
it very strongly.
and I strongly suggest that we should have Dr. Daftary as our guide when we go there. I've been to Cairo a few times, but having Dr. Daftary as a guide would be wonderful. But there is another place where I would want Dr. Daftary to be with me. And if you go to the next slide, I want to show that to the audience. Now, Dr. Daftary, you've written this book, and in fact, this was one of your earliest books. You know, so 1990, you come up with this magnum opus, the Ismaili, the Doctrine and History, and then this was, I think, 94.
Yeah.
And you've already called it the Assassin Legends, myths of the Ismailis. You've already kind of broken this myth. You've kind of shattered this myth.
I hope so.
Marco Polo had a kind of, it keeps surfacing interestingly, but you have done a great, I've read this work, and it's fascinating work. The images that we see are of Almut Fort and the restoration work that's currently going on. What I want, and I know that I'm asking for something impossible, but let me still try. If you could give us 3 major arguments that you make in this book to bust that myth.
Well, the first and foremost one is that you see Marco Polo in his book of travels, the composition of which is raises many sort of debatable questions, says that while he was passing through Iran a couple of decades after the Mongol invasion, because as you know, the Ismaili state was uprooted by the Mongols in 1256. Yeah. He was passing through Iran, if I'm not mistaken, in 1270. And he says that he heard these stories about the old man of the mountain and his assassins and so on. And he situates the locality of the stories in this fortress of Alamut, where supposedly a secret garden of paradise had been created for the training of the so-called Fedais. Now, when Giovanni in 1256, less than 20 years before Marco Polo, had accompanied the Mongol conqueror Hulagu to the site, before the site was partially demolished by the Mongols, Giovanni asked Hulagu's permission to go up into the castle, and he was particularly interested in visiting his library, the famous library, which had been founded already in the time of Hassan al-Sabbah himself. Hassan came into the possession of this fortress in 1090. Mongols came 1256, 166 years later. So that was the length of the Ismaili state. Giovanni, in his history of the Ismailis, at the end, has left a very vivid, again, eyewitness description of Alamut and its library and what he found in the library in terms of manuscripts and scientific instruments, but he says nothing about a secret or any other form of the garden that could have been used by the so-called Fedais. That was one. The second point that I can say is that in the entire literature that we have recovered from the Alamut period, nowhere ever in this literature we come across any references to any gardens in connection with the training of the Fedais, and perhaps more important than that, as a source for refuting the Assassin legends, we have to refer to the contemporary Muslim sources, especially from Syria, because these original legends were applied to the Syrian community.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It was Marco Polo who, for the first time, in his own imagination, transferred the scene from Syria to Iran. In all the contemporary Muslim sources, hostile as they were, historians like, for instance, Abu Shama, they refer to the Ismailis as Hashishis, but they never have any part of these legends. They do not. You cannot find these legends in the Muslim sources, which means that the legends were fabricated by the Crusaders and their European sources, but to satisfy their own curiosity to explain the self-sacrificing behavior of the Feda'is. They couldn't understand that, so they had to come up with these external forms as part of the training. The secret garden, hashish, and so on. Even the Muslims who refer to the Ismailis as hashishi, they never said that they were addicted or that they used to hashish. Hashish in 12th century, Syria and Egypt was a term of abuse.
Okay.
Not a reflection of the practices of the people.
Wow. So thank you for kind of giving that summary. And now that we're already in Iran, I think logical next from Almut, we can talk about is Anjudan period. So can we have the slides, please? Now we see these two beautiful buildings here. And I've been given to understand, I've read this in your work as well, that these belong to the Ismaili Imams.
Yes.
So we do have the archaeological evidences that talk about the presence of the Ismaili Imams in post-Almut period.
Yes.
So can you please throw some light on that?
On the fall of Alamut, the Imams went into hiding, the community became totally disorganized. Many Ismailis who had been spared the Mongol swords found refuge in adjacent lands, especially in Badakhshan and Sindh, where Ismaili communities already existed. So for 200 years, we don't have much information about the history of the community. But from around 1450s, we see the Imams starting with the one on the left, Imam Muslim Serbella, who was also known by his Sufi name of Shah Qalandar. He based himself in the village of Anjudan in central Iran. It's a village near Qom and Ismaila. So initiating the Anjudan Revival, which lasted 200 years. This revival focused on reviving the dawah activities and the literary activities of the community. So for the first time, we have Ismaili authors producing theological works and so on. The earliest text of this period is in fact the Pandiyat Jawanmardi,
Yes, okay.
which are the sayings of the Imam buried in the left-hand mausoleum, which was collected in the time of his grandson, Shah Khalid.
Okay, that's the on the mausoleum on the right.
Buried in the mausoleum on the right. So these are two of the earliest Imams who lived and led the dawah from Anjudan. This Anjudan revival became particularly successful in Central Asia and in South Asia.
So, there were a couple of questions that suddenly flashed on the screen, and I'm kind of taking the opportunity to ask those questions. So sorry. First, you mentioned Pandiyat, and that immediately revoked kind of, these memories of the Indian connection, the subcontinent,
Yes.
what I would call Hindustan. I mean, we're not talking British India, we're talking Hindustan.
Hindustan, yes.
So that there was a connection with this period there, one. And these mausoleums even exist today, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
so they still exist. Somebody asked that question. So little light on that India connection before we go to the next slide.
We have these two mausolea plus a number of the grave, tombstones affixed to the wall of that mausoleum on the right, about 4 or 5, which meant more than just that one Imam Shah Khalid was buried
in that particular book.
On that site.
Yeah.
And these are really the most reliable epigraphic evidence that we have from the Anjudan period, because we have the names of the Imams plus dates for the Imams. So it's really on the basis of this evidence that we've been able to fill some of the gaps we had in the history of the community and the line of the Imams during that period.
Wow, mashallah. And we do have the Ismailis in Iran who would be from that period, I'm assuming.
Yes, and then from slightly a bit later, not in 15, but from 16th and the 17th centuries, Khoja Murids began to come for the Didar from subcontinent to Anjudan and more so to Kahak, where we have gravestones written in Khochki and Sinti characters, attesting to the fact that there was this tradition of the Murids coming from South Asia to see the Imam of the time at his place.
That's an interesting
of residence
point that you mentioned, Dr. Daftary. That logically moves me to the next slide. But just, because Hafiz asked, do we have the Ismailis from that period? The Iranian Ismailis are there.
Yes.
And we are on the next slide. And I understand from Ivano's article that there are some Khochki and Gujarati tombstones in this site. This is Imam Nizar's.
I just mentioned that.
Yeah. So,
with Imam Shah Khalilullah, who died around 1680, I think, the seat of the Imamat was transferred to Kahak, very close to the village of Anjudan. And Kahak became the residence of Shah Nizar, who lived there, most probably in that building that we see on the left, which has now become his mausoleum. He died in 1722, as explained on his tombstone, which we see on the right. Now, these are most important epigraphic evidences that shed light on aspects of the history of the community and also the Imams during that period. But with Shah Nizar and his immediate successors, we enter into a new phase in the history of the Imams who now emerge into political prominence in Iran under various dynasties that ruled over Iran in 18th century, culminating in the dynasty of the Qajars, who came to power towards the end of 18th century and ruled until 1925.
So basically, we are getting a complete snapshot of our history. We moved from Almut to Anjudan to Kahak.
To summarize this whole book.
Yeah. And I'm sure, because I've read the book, and I was talking to Julia the other day, and I mentioned to her that I have read your earlier works, and I still found this fascinating because it's very simply written. It has less notes, a lot of new information as well. So, but you've already mentioned Kajar, so it seems that, my paper is already leaked. Move to the next slide, Rehana, please. So the next image that we have is what we have seen, all Ismailis around the world have seen during the Golden Jubilee and the Diamond Jubilee. When His Highness Maulana Hazir Imam was speaking, this image was in the backdrop.
Yes.
And we would want to know what is that connection, why that image becomes so important.
Well, this is the image of the second Qajar ruler, Rifat Ali Shah, who ruled from 1797 until 1834. He had very good relations with the family of the Imams. He was very, to the extent that we know, empathetic towards the Ismailis. And on the murder of the 45th Imam, Shah Khalilullah in Yazd in 1817, his son succeeded him as the 46th Imam, Aga Hassan Ali Shah, also known as Muhammad Hassan al-Husseini, and Rifat Ali Shah, and a very close relationship from that time developed between that Imam and this Qajar king. It was this Qajar monarch who bestowed the laqab, the honorific title of Aga Khan,
to the present,
on the Imam, meaning Lord and master, and also gave in marriage one of his daughter, Sarah Jahan Khanum, to Imam, and made him the governor of the holy city of Qom. And it was in the time of his successor, who was his grandson, Muhammad Shah, that the first Aga Khan was appointed to the governorship of the province of Kerman, like his grandfather, Shah Khalilullah's father, who ruled over that province and brought peace and prosperity to the province of Kerman for more than 4 decades until he died in 1792.
So we are already receiving the request for the book and the recording. So I've been noticing those messages, but inshallah, we'll talk about it at a later stage. I think this brings me to the next slide, and I'm going to go a little personal on this, and I'm sure you'll forgive me for this. This is the image of Imam Hassan Ali Shah. And from your book, an introduction to your magnum opus, I now know that you have some family connection with Aga Khans. So I've got the images. Then on the right, I have Hasnabad, which is the mausoleum in Mazgaon in Bombay. So we come to India now. We know Imam Hassan Ali Shah migrated to India around in mid-1840s and settled in Bombay in 1848. We have the seal of Imam Hassan Ali Shah on the screen there. Please talk to us about your connection and, of course, the importance of that phrase.
My connection with the first Aga Khan is that my great-grandfather on my mother's side was the younger brother of the first Aga Khan, and he was also the Sardar or commander of the forces of Aga Khan, and hence it was known as Sardar Abul Hassan Khan. And the Aga Khan himself, in his autobiography, the Afzal, which we published with an English translation a couple of years ago, has many references to.
Oh yes, it constantly talks about Abul Hassan Khan,
his brother, and so on. And in fact, the Aga Khan, who was highly very kindly and treated by the Qajar establishment for some complicated reason, which had to do with the leadership of the main branch of the Ni'matullahi Sufi order, which we need not get into here, came into conflict with the Qajar regime. Finally, he had to go to even battle with the Qajar regime. And he was finally defeated when a large army of more than 20,000 were sent to fight the forces of the Imam in Kerman and Yazd. And in the year 1841, he crossed into Afghanistan together with my ancestor, and then he sent Sardar Abul Hassan Khan back to Iran, and that's why he and his descendants remained in Iran, but they looked after the affairs of the community and the properties of the Imam in Mahallat and so on. So the Imam then headed on to Kutch in Gujarat and Calcutta, and finally settled down permanently in Bombay in the year 1848, which initiated the modern period in the life of the community. His imamat lasted some 60 odd years, from 1817 until 1881, and then he was buried in Mumbai. They wanted to take him to Najaf, which was a tradition at the time, but the Khoja Murids were so insistent that he should remain amongst them that they kept the body and built a special mausoleum for him, which still may be seen in Mumbai.
So in fact,
the seal, of course, the seal was really the formal seal which the Imam affixed to official documents. They also did sign their names, but to make it formal and official.
This was an official seal.
Official seal.
And this is now in our collection at the.
We have
Aga Khan
quite
Center.
a few of these seals in our collection here. In our.
In fact, the image of Hasnabad that we see has been provided to us by the staff member of ITREB India. Samir, and so thank you very much for that, and that we have used in the book, in a couple of books, in fact. If we go to the next, you already mentioned Najaf and Karbala and Iran, and I want to come to this next Aga Khan, Imam Ali Shah, who died in Pune, was brought to Mumbai. His body was kept in Hasnabad, but then was kind of taken to Najaf, where he's buried.
Yes.
So we want to know the significance of this and who else is buried in that complex.
Well, in that the mausoleum really started with Shah Khalilullah himself when he was murdered in Yazd in 1817. His body, as was actually customary at the time for many of the Shi'i Muslims, both Ismaili and perhaps more so especially, they were taken to the holy places in Iraq, to the so-called Atabat, Najaf and Karbala and so on. And then you see and then we had the second Aga Khan buried there. Later on, his wife, Khanim Shamsul Muluk, the mother of the third Aga Khan, who died in 1938, is also buried there. And also Pir Shahabuddin, who was the eldest son of Ali Shah, is also buried there, where my great-grand
father is also buried.
Yes.
So very close connection.
Sardar Abul Hassan Khan is also buried there.
It's a significant place. Again, I hope we have access to it, and someday we photograph it.
I've been trying to get.
We will inshallah manage.
Get some photographs and to visit the site, but so far I have not been successful.
Inshallah, we'll find somebody to kind of visit.
And then, of course, that photo on the left is really the only photo of the first and the second Aga Khans that I have seen, and it's actually in my collection, which will go to the institute shortly.
Right, and recently we have come across a photo where we have Aga Khan first, Aga Khan second, and third Aga Khan as well.
I'm not sure if that is a Photoshop or an actual photo.
So let's figure out.
I rely on your judgment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daftary. I think let's go to the third Aga Khan. We are reaching the time that was allocated to us, so we will rush into the next two slides. And can we go to the next one? Oh, you already have it up on the screen. So this is now Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah, the longest serving Imam, 72 years of Imamat, glorious period, lot of achievement. And I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you to pick one reform, one event that is attributed to the third Aga Khan that you feel is the most significant.
Well, you cannot really, you have to look at the reform package of the Imam. I mean, from around 1915, 1920, seriously, I would mention two areas really, rather than one. One was delineating and articulating the specific Ismaili identity of the community, which he articulated meticulously in the Ismaili constitutions. The first of which was promulgated in the year 1901 for the Jamaat in Zanzibar. And then that. So that was really one, together with the administrative council system that he put in place. Second one was had to do with his reforms and modernizing policies in terms of education, health, and so on. And also, perhaps what is significant, particular attention paid to the emancipation of women and their their participation in communal affairs. For its time, this was a very revolutionary step. If you put it in the context of the times, he was way ahead of his time and way ahead of what other Muslim leaders were even thinking of at the time.
So really women empowerment as one of the very important achievements.
If I had to single one item, I would point to that.
MashaAllah. No, that's good. And I'm happy that, we had that reform, because today we do see that in amongst Ismailis, women play an active role. Can we move to the next slide, please. And this is the last but one slide, and this is our current Imam. You've been working very closely with him for last many years. And if I were to ask you the same question in terms of his 60 plus years of Imamate, significant achievements.
But there are so many. There are so
One or
many.
two, your favorite.
I would really say that his achievements are captured in terms of two metrics or two. One is the creation of the institutional network known as AKTN, which really covers the breadth and breadth of all the variety of the institutions. Some are based on the foundations created by
the previous Imam.
By his grandfather, the previous Imam, but most of it are new, reflect his own initiatives. So that is one whole area which covers social, economic, and cultural visions of the present Imam. And the second one, I would say, by his attempts to bring about a better understanding of Islam. In the world today, not only in terms of Islam as a religion and its the multiplicity of expressions and interpretations, but that's more importantly, Islam as one of the great world civilizations. And for that, he has also created a number of institutions, notably AKTC, which serves as an umbrella for Aga Khan Award for Architecture, the Aga Khan Historic Cities Program, Aga Khan Museum,
and even
so
the music.
And his attention to education, which goes far beyond what was attempted previously in terms of his establishment of major educational institutions, starting with our own institute, AKU,
and
UCA.
MashaAllah.
The University of
And
Central.
that brings me to my last slide. And can we have the last one? And this is where we are located. We are actually conducting this event at the Aga Khan Center. This is the image that I wanted to flash and actually ask you one question about the Institute of Ismaili Studies, because the book is published by the IIS.
Yeah.
You have been the director of the Institute for all these years. And we have I am a graduate of this place, so I'm a direct beneficiary, but the Jamaat has benefited. We have 160 plus publication. It's a different story that you've kind of contributed more than 20 to that and over 300 articles. So that's an amazing achievement for any scholar. I mean, I can't think of anybody who can boast of that kind of academic production, but that's amazing. I want to know what is the institute trying to do? Where do you see the IIS contributing to? Because the Ismaili studies is synonymous to Dr. Daftary today. Dr. Farhad Daftary is equal to the Ismaili studies. Now, the Institute of Ismaili Studies is doing a lot of work. So I want to understand as director, what is that mission that kind of, you see?
Our mission has to really reflect what the present Imam's vision is for the Institute and for Islam, more broadly speaking, and how Islamic studies should be approached. Now, the Institute is actually producing its programs and initiatives all in the service of that vision. I mean, our products are aligned with what the Imam has instructed us, not only at the beginning, but over the years, as we meet with him, as we listen to his guidance and so on. One is to portray Islam not merely as a theology, but as a faith with many interpretations, and also as a great civilization. and to pay attention to those areas which have been ignored and marginalized in practically in all of the Islamic studies departments elsewhere, namely Ismaili studies and more broadly Shi'i studies. So that is really our mandate, to work on these two areas, to not only for the academia and for the benefit of the Jamaat, but also for the non-specialist, I would say, audiences, to really develop a better understanding of what Islam is. Islam is not what was founded about the 14th centuries ago. We've come a long way since then, and the tradition of the community actually does reflect that.
Great. So thank you very much for that. I think that's where we can clearly situate this work as well, and many of the works that we do, our graduate programs, our curriculum, everything gets situated in that framework. So you beautifully summarized it. Can we end the slideshow? Now, as part of this conversation, Dr. Daftary, I consulted my friends, family, and my colleagues at the IIS, and I told them that I was going to have a conversation with you, and if they were to ask you a question, what would they ask? Now, some of them you've already answered while you were looking at the slides. So I'll skip one or two and go to the next one, which was asked by one of my family members. He says, if you meet Dr. Daftary, ask him that if he had a chance to go back in history and meet one Imam and be present for the one event, and you're supposed to select one Imam and one event, what would it be?
That's a very tough question to answer, because there are so many key moments and key Imams, let's say, key events in Ismaili history. But if I were to pick one in terms of its historical significance,
Yes.
I would pick the event of the enthronement of Abdullah al-Mahdi as the first ruling Fatimid Imam Caliph, when he arrived in Qayrawaan, as I mentioned, on the 4th of January 910. I would not have minded it if I could have been hidden amongst the audience in the major mosque in Qayrawaan, where he was received by the dignitaries of the city, and his caliphate was proclaimed, because that really brought to an end the obscure period of concealment which had preceded the history of the community and ushered in the golden age, what I would call the golden age of Ismailism. Because now the Ismailis, instead of being more frequently than not persecuted, had a state of their own, a state that grew very rapidly into a major empire. Ismaili thought and literature attained its summit. You have these giants of scholars, people like Dais, Alwaez Hussain Jasani, Hamiduddin Al-Kirmani, Al-Baithuddin Shirazi, Nasir-i Khusraw, who produced a classical text, Mr. Qazi Nu'man, who codified Ismaili law. And for the first time, the community came to have a school of jurisprudence on par with the Sunni schools. And
you're referring to Darul Islam?
Yes.
Yeah,
Darul Islam, which served as a legal code of the Fatimid state. So that would have been a key moment that I would have wished to witness.
And the second best moment, let me tell you, Dr. Daftary, that we can witness is the time that we are in, where we are sitting with a giant like you, Dr. Daftary.
I don't know
So, but I do have a few questions before I hand it over to ITREB India.
Yes.
They have collected a few questions from the audience. But I have one question, which again, many colleagues had a similar question. You have written this book, which requires 2 hands to lift. It's so heavy, okay? And then you created a summary of it, a short history.
Yeah.
Then you landed up creating an accessible illustrated history. And then you wrote a modern history of the Ismailis. And now you write this.
I edited that.
Yeah, you have a considerable section there.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything left that somebody else can do? Or you've just exhausted everything there is to be done?
No, there is room for much further research in the field of Ismaili studies. I would say we are still at the stage of scratching the surface, really.
Okay.
There are still many events that have to be explained and understood to see better. There are many regions, the histories of which have to be clarified. I would say one of the top priorities for the next phase of Ismaili, in addition to what I mentioned in terms of filling some of the gaps in our historical knowledge, is to focus on regional histories and traditions. The Central Asian tradition, the Salpan and Genanic traditions of the South Asian Khojas. These really require whole new source of initiatives, teams, agendas, strategies. So there is really much room for further endeavor in those areas. And I'm glad to say that we have been involved in studying the Central Asian traditions. Now, as of about 2 years ago, I mean, just about 2 years ago, we have set up, as you know, the South Asian Studies Unit, which is headed by yourself.
No pressure.
And of course, the aim, the objectives set for this unit are to really look at the sort of traditions, both literary and intellectual, of the South Asian Ismailis, and to document them and to present them to the Jama'at and to wider audiences in terms of publications, conferences, exhibitions, and so on and so forth. And so this is a very tall order for you to say.
Inshallah.
Yes.
Under your guidance and direction, Dr. Daftary. I do have quite a few questions, but what I'll do is I'll take the last one and then pass it on to Alwaez Nadia Samliwala. She's a board member at ITREB India, and she's collected a few questions. So the last question from my side, before Nadia, you come on the screen, is what is the best way Ismaili children can learn about the history, about the Imam? You know, you make it sound very easy and interesting, but where do children go? What do they refer to if they want to?
I mean, you know, for children, particularly, or for, I would say, for younger adults in general, knowledge or enhancement of knowledge occurs incrementally. We cannot learn 1400 years overnight. This is a very slow, time-consuming process. It requires patience. It requires right approach. Right approach is, first of all, to be familiar with a frame. To set a frame, to see who the Ismailis were, how do they fit in within the broader Ummah, when did their history begin, what were the circumstances, how were the early Shi'i Imams shared by them, and then when did they, you see all of these. And then to start by learning the biographies from the beginning, starting with Hazrat Ali and going down the list one by one.
One Imam at a time.
One Imam at a time.
Okay.
Slowly, Italians say piano, piano, ballontano. Means slowly, we can go far away.
Yeah. No, that's a good advice to have. And with that,
don't be in a rush. There's no
shortcut.
No instant way. There's no shortcut.
Right. But I can certainly say that reading this work would be a good start, maybe one Imam at a time.
Yes,
in fact,
helpful too.
Yes, there are 49 chapters actually. So you've actually divided the history into Imams.
And I would also recommend the secondary modules that we produce at the
very
IIS.
user-friendly, and
the historical ones will really help you grasp that frame and the details that need to go with it.
Right. And inshallah, we can someday talk about the secondary modules as well. But let's go to Nadia. Nadia, you have some questions, right? So can you please throw those questions at Dr. Daftary, and inshallah, we'll take 2, 3, as many as we can. And if there's time left, we can go back to the questions that I had received.
Yes. So thank you so much for the wonderful insights, Dr. Daftary. Events like these are really filled with reflections, enthusiasm, and a quest for learning. And so today we have explored and learned so much about our history and heritage through all the sharings of Dr. Daftary and Dr. Jasani. Thank you so much. So Dr. Daftary, with your permission, maybe continue asking a few questions that we've received from participants in India, if you would just address some of them. Yes. So
Okay.
one of the questions that's come up is in your book, you mention about the recently recovered manuscript Haftbab, written after the declaration of Qiyamah at Almut. Can you shed some light on the significance and contribution of such manuscripts to Ismaili history?
Okay. You see, as I mentioned at the beginning, the progress in modern Ismaili studies, in fact, came about as a result of recovery and study of a large number of such manuscript sources, which had been preserved secretly in many places ranging from Yemen to Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, other parts of Central Asia and South Asia. Now, from the Alamut period, unfortunately, we do not have a vast, voluminous literature from that period for a variety of reasons, mainly two. One was that the circumstances that the community faced during that period were, for instance, quite different from those faced by the Ismailis living under the Fatimids. Under the Fatimids, they had a state, they had an empire, they were safe and secure. So these guys could had the luxury of safety to be able to write their text. Not so in Alamut period. In Alamut period, the Ismailis, who were situated mostly in fortress communities in Iran and Syria, were confronted with constant attacks from a host of enemies, starting with the Seljuks, and then the Khwarezm-Shahs, and finally the Mongols. So they did not have the luxury of producing too many very highly trained scholars. They had commanders, they had the sort of that sort of leadership. And furthermore, secondly, the bulk of what they produced was destroyed in the Mongol invasions and did not survive. So, but however, we do have enough sources that have come down to us, and it's really on that basis, including especially the works attributed to two scholars. One was Khaja Nasiruddin Tusi, who lived amongst the Ismailis towards the end of the Alamut period, from 1227 until the Mongol invasions. He became an Ismaili himself, as he explains in his spiritual autobiography, Seyr Suluk, and also Hassan Mahmud Katib. Hassan Mahmud Katib, who in fact collaborated with Tusi in producing one or two texts. This Hassan Mahmud lived a few decades after the declaration of the Qiyamah. Qiyamah was declared at Alamut in 1164. Hassan Mahmud wrote this book, evidently Haftbab, in 1200.
Okay.
Now, this is the earliest book from the Alamut period that has come down to us, which therefore sheds valuable light on the declaration of the Qiyamah and its meaning and its significance and its also interpretation. But what is most significant in terms of its historical value, because it connects Hassan al-Zakr Salam, who declared the Qiyamah, to Imam Nizar.
That's wonderful. The facts and the significance that you've given us gives us that importance of this manuscript. Thank you so much.
In fact, its significance is unique in that sense.
Right. Exactly. So the next question that's come up is, what are the key messages you would like your readers to take away from this book?
From this book, there are many key messages. If I had to choose one, is the importance, the centrality of the line of the Imams and the institution of Imamat. But the community, as you know, has lived in many places. They have seen many ups and downs, persecution, taqiyya practices, then the safety of the state, all of that, different cultural traditions, different languages. Today, you find the community spread in more than 30 countries, speaking a variety of languages, culture. But they're all the unifying factor throughout all these complex and so eventful centuries has been the central role of the Imam of the time. In that sense, it's really the institution of the Imamat that has served as a cement, holding the community together and giving it its sense of identity, integration, and coherence. Because without this and the role of the Imam of the time, this would not have happened.
Right, right. And this really brings us to this question that has come up, that can you please highlight the role of the seat of the Ismaili Imamat established in Portugal, and how, in your view, will the Diwan be of historical significance in highlighting the role of the Ismaili Imamat in the years to come?
I don't know what the question was, because you mentioned 2 or 3 statements. Well, I mean, the seat of the Imamat traditionally has been where the Imam lived.
Right.
The Imam's residence was the seat of the Imamat, and when the Ismailis were involved in Dawah activities, it was also the central headquarters of the Dawah. So the central headquarters of the Dawah and the seat of the Imam, and I mean, the place of the residence of the Imam and the seat of the Imamat were located in the same place. In modern times, that the Ismailis, of course, as you know, are not involved in Dawah activities. The seat of the Imamat from the 19th century onwards has been located at the place of the residence of the Imam. The present Imam, as you know, had his seats at Aiglemont for many decades, until about 2 years ago. That the seat was established in Lisbon, called a Divan, which is really is a term of historical significance. Divan traditionally referred to ministries. You had a Divan, for instance, in Shah, which was the chancellery of state under the Fatimids. Now, this is in recognition of the importance and significance of the Ismaili Imamat and the international diplomatic role that has been acknowledged for the Imam, for the present Imam, in view of his numerous activities in those domains. So the present Imam has really moved up the institution and the seat of the Imamat to a new, much higher new level, and it is in recognition of that the seat was transferred to Lisbon.
Yes.
So what was the last part of your question? I remember it vaguely, but I'm not sure if I...
Yes, Doctor, you addressed that to some extent. So, and there are so many questions coming up, Doctor, for you. But let me ask you one more question, one last question about the preface of the book. So you mentioned in the preface of your book that there are some missing details of at least some of the biographies of the Ismaili Imams, which in due course will be filled. Can you shed some light on your future publications? We know 20 books and this is going to go on, and tell us something about your future publications also.
As historians, we always base our work on reliable evidence, which is sort of available, accessible to us, and we try not to say anything unless we can substantiate it on the basis of the sources, which not only any sources, because we also have polemical sources which were written for the specific aim of refuting and condemning, let's say, a community. Now, this book, for instance, has been written in a historical fashion, meaning the biography of each Imam is presented within the context of his time.
Right.
See? Now, for some of the Imams, we have ample knowledge and information, especially for the ones who were rulers, who ruled as the Fatimid caliphs or as the lords of Alamut. But for some others, especially during, for instance, the periods of concealment, which we had 2 or 3, even when the Imams themselves made every effort to hide their activities and identity and so on, obviously we do not have much information because the Imams themselves did not want us to have too much information. Now, in terms of my current work, I would mention 2 projects. One is that currently I'm involved in putting together and editing an encyclopedia of the Ismailis. Now, this is the first work of reference of its kind. It covers all the Imams for whom we have sufficient information, da'is, peers, traditions, institutions, and so on. So this will be either a 1 or most probably a 2-volume work. I'm also working on a biography of Hassan Sabbah, on which I have been working on and off for many, many years, but my other commitments have prevented me to really commit a good chunk of my time to this. But Hassan Sabbah, I've always found him to be a very fascinating character. He was first, Da'i, administrator, strategist, theologian, philosopher, mathematician. He founded the state. And had it not been for him, most probably the Nasir-i Dawah would not have come into. He is the one who upheld the cause of Nizar and broke his relations with Fatimid Cairo, which had lent their support to the cause of Al-Bustani. So he's the founder of the state, and in a sense, the founder of the Nasir-i Dawah. Now, these are 2 highly significant contributions that he made. Now, what made it possible for him to function so successfully in such a hostile milieu brought about by the Sunni Seljuks who had vowed to uproot the Fatimids?
Right.
So, he, in a sense, must have been a magician. He must have come up with miracles to have been able to achieve so much, having faced so many difficulties. So I hope to be able to complete a book on Hassan Sabbah and his times.
Inshallah, we look forward to actually.
Always in the context of his times.
Yes. Inshallah, we are all looking forward for these 2, encyclopedia and the publication on Da'i Hassan Sabbah.
Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all the best and a very happy Imamat Day. Imamat Day Mubarak.
Thank you, Dr. Daftary.
I have one final question. If you want to learn more about the Ismailis, especially the 49 Imams, buy this book and read it.
Yes, we are all in India waiting for this book, and we thank you so much for all the perspectives that you've given us regarding this book. Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Ya Ali Madad.
Thank you. Imam Mubarak and Khuda Hafiz.